We'll be dealing with some sections from Proverbs chapter 2 and 3, reminding us why we need the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives. My child, learn what I teach you and never forget what I tell you to do. Listen to what is wise and try to understand it. Yes, beg for knowledge. Plead for insight. Look for it as hard as you would for silver or some hidden treasure. If you do, you will know what it means to fear the Lord, and you will succeed in learning about God. It is the Lord who gives wisdom. From him come knowledge and understanding. He provides help and protection for those who are righteous and honorable. He protects those who treat others fairly and guards those who are devoted to him. If you listen to me, you will know what is right, just, and fair. You will know what you should do. You will become wise, and your knowledge will give you pleasure. Your insight and understanding will protect you and prevent you from doing the wrong thing. They will keep you away from people who stir up trouble by what they say. Those who have abandoned a righteous life to live in the darkness of sin. Those who find pleasure in doing wrong and who enjoy senseless evil. Unreliable people who cannot be trusted. From Proverbs 3, my child, don't forget what I teach you. Always remember what I tell you to do. My teaching will give you long and prosperous life. Never let go of loyalty and faithfulness. Tie them around your neck, write them on your heart. If you do this, God and people, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Never rely on what you think you know. Remember the Lord in everything you do, and he will show you the right way. Never let yourself think that you are wiser than you are. Simply obey the Lord and refuse to do wrong. If you do it, it will be like good medicine, healing your wounds and easing your pain. Whenever you possibly can, do good to those who need it. Never tell your neighbors to wait until tomorrow if you can help them now. Don't plan anything that will hurt your neighbors. They live beside you, trusting you. Don't argue with others for no reason when they've never done you any harm. Don't be jealous of violent people or decide to act as they do, because the Lord hates people who do evil, but he takes righteous people into his confidence. My brothers and sisters in Christ, this is a minimum standard that we want to require in our homes. Moral and spiritual maturity. Just as we want indoor plumbing, electricity, and adequate shelter for everyone, we expect homes to be free from violence, abuse, incest, addictions, and other dysfunctional behavior. Where such behavior is found, it is to be considered totally unacceptable. We have to determine our nation's vision and labor toward higher moral and spiritual principles and values. Just as we expect our people who are able to make some contribution to nation building to do so, we can also expect our people to work hard at being people of integrity and spiritual prosperity with virtues that will stand us in good stead in the future. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. This weekend, may we celebrate Randall Force Labor Day and Pentecost with a view to working for God and for our country. Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, and we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Desmond Bannister, Brenda Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Dane, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio D'Angela, Michael Pintar, Darren Henfield, Ramal Ferreira, Denisha Rose, Brenzo Rose, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Patricia Parker Edstrom, Ira Lewis, Carlton Gomez, James Audrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Heinz Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Folks, Miriam Brackley Emmanuel, Reese Stickman, Ruben Rami, Ricky Mackey, Sharon Dawn Cartwright, Charnel Ferguson, Glennis Hannah Martin, Heiko Forbes, Jessica Cooper.
Good morning, honorable members. Honorable members, as we proceed with the people's business this morning, I wish to address a matter that occurred last week with respect to the disturbance that occurred in the gallery that interrupted the proceedings of this Parliament. First of all, I want to indicate to everyone present and everyone listening that the law provides for certain criminal offenses with respect to particularly strangers affecting the proceeding in this Parliament. According to the Powers and Privileges Senate and House of Assembly Act, Chapter 8, Section 25, there are 9 offenses listed. But for the proceedings today, I would only focus on 3 of them. Any person, Section 25, subsection A, any person who assaults, molests, obstructs any senator coming to, being within, or going from the precincts of the Senate, or any member coming to, being within, or going from the precincts of the House. 25, subsection 3, any person who threatens or assaults a senator, a member, or any officer of either chamber on account of his conduct as such senator, member, or officer, or 25.3, which is the relevant one today, 25 subsection D, that is, creates or joins in any disturbance which interrupts or is likely to interrupt the proceedings of either chamber or any committee while in chamber or committee is sitting, shall be guilty of an offense and shall be liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $600 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or both such fine and such imprisonment. The Royal Bahamas Police Force have been engaged in an investigation in the matter that occurred on the 29th of May, 2019. And the Royal Bahamas Police Force is in the midst of its investigations. The chairman and presiding officer of the Parliament having given a statement to the Royal Bahamas Police Force on yesterday, and the clerk of this Parliament having given a statement to the police on yesterday, and the police indicating that they intend to take 2 further statements, a statement from the member for Golden Gates, where one of the missiles that were thrown landed on the desk, and a statement from the member for Michael, where one of the objects landed on the desk that were tossed by the stranger from the gallery. With respect to reports and the broadcast of the events from this Parliament. The rules are clear. Whenever a disturbance occurs within the precincts of this Parliament, the cameras, particularly those of the Parliamentary channel, are to be directed on the chair and not roam the gallery and broadcast the events. Nor should there have been any cell phone recording of the event that took place and that was distributed on social media. The reports that I've received based on that breach of the rules and the broadcast on social media has resulted, in my estimation, to a very serious threat on the security of the Parliament of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and on its senators and members. As a consequence of that, the ruling of this chair with respect to cell phones are as follows. No stranger will be permitted to bring a cell phone into the chamber of this Parliament without first receiving permission from the Speaker via the clerk of this Parliament. Technocrats of the government would be permitted to bring their cell phones into the chambers of the Parliament. The media will be permitted to bring cell phones into the chamber of the Parliament, and of course members are permitted to bring their computers and cell phones into the Parliament. But under no circumstance should any recording of the proceedings of this Parliament by cell phone be broadcast without first receiving clearance from the presiding officer of the Parliament. Having said those few words, I have acceded to the request of the member for North Abaco who wished to bring a communication with respect to an incident that occurred out of our jurisdiction. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for North Abaco.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise with a heavy heart this morning as Minister of Foreign Affairs to report to this body and to the Bahamian people on the deaths of two young Bahamians, namely Alray Ramsey, a Foreign Service officer in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who was on study leave, and one Blair John, a PhD candidate who was studying in Canada. Mr. Speaker, I will speak deliberately the information that is within the domain of the government, and I do so quite guardedly. As follows. Officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs arrived in Turin, Italy today and met with the police officials. We can now confirm that the body pulled from the river was that of Mr. Alray Ramsey, a Foreign Service officer who was on study leave in Vienna, Austria, and who visited Turin over the middle of last week. We've been in contact with the family of Mr. Ramsey and shared all the information that we have to date. We can also confirm that the body of the second Bahamian man that was pulled from the river Po in Turin was positively identified as that of Mr. Blair John. We continue to remain in close contact with his family, and we urge members of the public to keep the families in their prayers and to show compassion and understanding, but not jumping to conclusions and sharing speculative information widely. We also ask the public to keep his colleagues and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in their prayers during this very difficult and tragic time. As soon as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has more information, we will update members of the public. That ends my formal communication. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to add, as you indicated just now about social media, information spreads rife on social media, and sometimes families, immediate family members, are not contacted, and they have to find this information that is going viral all over the country and all over the world. It is a very dangerous activity that people will be putting out information without concern for the care of those people personally affected, their family members. And so I'd like to add my voice of caution to yours, that we should be more careful in the way we disseminate information and have more cognizance of people. These are the children of people. And if you're going to make a formal communication especially, you should contact those family members before you do so. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication to lie on the table. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following: Public Holidays, Bit Monday 2019, opening of Shops Notice 2019.
Order that the document be brought up.
I guess they won't get it in early.
Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for South Beach.
May it please the Honorable Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the Ministry of Education's Annual Report 2016-2017.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Thank you, Mr. Clark. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Honorable members, I have in my possession message number 31 from the Senate. The Honorable Senate acquaints the Honorable House of Assembly that they have passed the following bill, accompanying message number 32 dated the 15th of May 2019 from the Honorable House of Assembly. A bill for an act to amend the Police Staff Association Act to amend the law relating to the election of branch board members. Order that the message do lie on the table. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. presentations of petitions, presentations of reports of committees, adoption of reports of committees, first reading of bills, second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I begin, I would like to add my sentiments to that of the Foreign Minister and indeed all Bahamians in expressing condolences to the families of those two young men that would have met their untimely demise in a foreign land. And no one can anticipate or even imagine the loss of a child. And certainly we can all appreciate the sincere grief that their families must be experiencing at this time. The mother of Ramsey, I understand, retired from the Bahamas Development Bank. And so on behalf of the management and the staff of the Bahamas Development Bank, we certainly want to extend special condolences to her as she would go through this very difficult and painful time. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, I want to say how sad we are to learn that in my constituency in East Grand Bahama, there was a fire last night that totally destroyed a home. And there are some unconfirmed reports surrounding that, and so I will leave that there. But certainly, we certainly want the family to know that we're thinking about them at this time. Mr. Speaker, on the 29th of May, I presented the 2019-2020 budget communications to this House, outlining the government's economic and fiscal agenda for the next 12 months and beyond. Today, it is indeed my pleasure to rise once again to speak to the way that this budget will positively impact the lives of Bahamians, young people, families, small businesses, and more, and transform our country into a modern society, an inclusive society, and an opportunity-driven society. Also, Mr. Speaker, a society where government is perceived as a welcomed partner instead of an unnecessary hindrance to advancing as individuals and or as a business. As with any good vision, ours is highly aspirational. It embodies the type of transformation that does not happen overnight. It happens by changing the culture of institutions, which takes painstaking work. It happens by changing the way we operate, even changing the questions we ask. There's no doubt we are so used to doing things the same way that they've always been done in government that we sometimes forget the power of simply asking, does this make sense? Is this the best way to give Bahamians the best experience? Is it the best way to make sure Bahamians receive the greatest benefit? Mr. Speaker, the decisions we make in this budget demonstrate that the Bahamian people have a willing partner in this government, ready and able to uproot outdated systems and old ways of doing things that no longer make sense. The Bahamian people have a caring and competent partner, willing to make decisions that not only accrue short-term gain, but lay the foundation for stability, that they put us on a course of sustainable prosperity for all Bahamians, with particular emphasis on expanding opportunities for our youth. We are at the early stage of a number of critical, vital, long overdue structural reforms. The same structural reforms that have been bandied about for years with no serious attention by anyone, most particularly not the side opposite. This work might not be glamorous or lend itself to easy slogans like those used by the opposition, but they are important if we're going to create the kind of Bahamas that will succeed in an ultra-competitive 21st century global marketplace. Mr. Speaker, this is an inspirational and imaginative budget. Mr. Speaker, you will see this reflected in the budget as presented and the areas I plan to highlight today, including our commitment to fiscal responsibility, which protects the fiscal health of the economy and therefore our standard of living, our holistic approach to tax policy, which has allowed us to reduce the relative tax burden on the poor and bump government's revenue to more sustainable levels. Our commitment to citizen empowerment, which means breaking the cycle of poverty and government dependency. Our approach to sustainable economic growth, which is largely about making it easier to do business in the Bahamas and putting Bahamians in control of their destinies. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the work undertaken by the government is implemented through the various ministries and departments. The presentations by ministers during the budget debate will therefore reveal more detail about the full range of projects and initiatives we have budgeted for in this new fiscal year. But before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I want to answer some of the questions that have emerged since the presentation of the budget communication and provide further clarity around the positive and sustainable impacts this budget will have on the lives of Bahamians and the nation as a whole. Regarding the question of travel and subsistence, Mr. Speaker, I want to use this time to resolve some queries members of the public have expressed regarding the increase in the allocation for travel and subsistence. I would start by noting that the increase in this line item from $8.9 million in 2018-19 to $18.9 million in 2019-20 is due mostly to a reporting error or a presentation error in the booklet, in that salaries for urban renewal, which was actually supposed to be captured under head 44, was mistakenly added to the air transportation line item under travel and subsistence. This accounts for some $3.5 million of the $5.4 million increase in air transportation for domestic travel. So reduce the travel, the 18.5 by 3.4 million due to an error in the printing of the book. Apart from that, the overall increase in travel and subsistence is not due to any immense increase in any one item, but instead reflects incremental increases across all ministries, and in some case, right budgeting. For example, the Royal Bahamas Police Force has budgeted $350,000 for air transportation for domestic travel, but it spent $393,180 in the 9 months into March. This clearly shows that what they had budgeted was not sufficient to meet their needs. And as a result of employing what we call right budgeting for 2019-20, their allocation for air transportation has increased to $509,200. Similarly, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force budgeted $112,000 for domestic air transport, and by end of March 2019, had spent a total of $170,000, again representing a mismatch of provisions with real needs or actual needs. Thus, in this budget, we have allocated $190,000 for this line item. This is right and the proper thing to do, making realistic estimates based on the actual needs of any one department as we become aware of them. In addition, some ministries may have reflected a larger increase in travel allocations due to the fact that under the new chart of accounts, some line items would have been grouped together and that may have been recorded separately in previous budgets. For example, in the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, all of the travel for the National Arts Festival, National Youth Month, the National Cultural Festival, and a number of other cultural festivals were consolidated under air transportation for domestic travel under this ministry. Thus, the increase in their travel and subsistence figure would look substantial, but in actuality does not reflect a real increase in the allocation. In fact, this was the case for a number of line items in this budget apart from travel allocations. So when you see a huge increase from year to year, it may not necessarily increase more money or say that more money is being spent on that line item, but simply that a number of initiatives or projects or programs and departments have now been rolled up into one line item. And this is a part of the transition that we're making to the new chart of accounts and eventually to program budgeting. So we're still in a transition period, and we acknowledge that there is some confusion in the public about trying to compare apples to apples in this regard. I now turn to a brief discussion on some of the misconceptions regarding the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. Mr. Speaker, during the budget communication, I mentioned that ministry line items have been cut across the board as a result of preliminary line item by line item reviews that reveal the history of over-budgeting. The opposition would like to make the reduction in allocations to the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture sound like a sinister move by the government to deprive young people of support. This is completely misrepresenting the facts. In the ministry's budget, there have been annual allocations of $1.9 million every year for the IAAF World Relays. However, that event is no longer held in the Bahamas. Rightly so, the allocation for it have been substantially eliminated. The same is true for the allocation that was previously provisioned for Bahamas Junk Canoe Carnival. The Minnis administration privatized this event, and necessary adjustments were needed to reflect that Carnival is no longer a national priority for spending taxpayer money. These outcomes are what secured the reduction in the allocation, as opposed to the government neglecting youth and culture programs. As I said last week, the Bahamian people now have a government that can actually handle the full weight of its responsibilities, including those to our young people and sporting and cultural communities, and to our taxpayers generally. Mr. Speaker, in respect to social services allocation, it is worth explaining the allocation in the budget to support our social safety net, as some in the opposition and in the media have misrepresented the numbers, particularly those concerning items number 2721001 under social assistance benefits. Beginning in fiscal year 2014-2015, the Progressive Liberal Party spent approximately $4 million on the Renewable, Inspiring, Sustaining, Empowerment, or RISE Social Safety Net Reform Project, which was started under an IDB loan facility in 2012. However, Mr. Speaker, due to the fact that the government could not meet the deliverables of the facility, the program was stopped in August of 2017. And that was in agreement with the IDB. This administration, however, saw the value of the program, which was centered on alleviating poverty in the Bahamas by changing behavior to bring about improvements in education and health and those in the lower income class. To this end, we took away some of the positive lessons from the RISE program and integrated them into our core service offerings so that those that would have been assisted by the program initially would not lose their net benefit. To do this, we allocated $1 million in 2018-19 towards the services of the old program. However, we found that those services did not require the level of funding, as only $75,760 was spent at as of March of 2019. So despite the allocation for 2019-20 being much lower than the $1 million that was budgeted in 2018-19, the $488,951 actually allocated actually represents, one, the closeout of the Social Safety Net program, and two, proper budgeting to fit the needs of a particular program. I would note also that allocating just under $500,000 allows us room to expand the services currently offered under this line item, which will help to further alleviate poverty in the Bahamas. Moreover, although the Department of Social Services had a 1.7% decrease overall, in line with the general practices of more precise budgeting, we increased the budget allocation significantly in this most important area. Specifically, the overall social assistance benefit allocation increased by $1.6 million in the upcoming budget. It is important to repeat this. The allocation overall for social assistance benefits will increase by $1.6 million in the upcoming budget year. Mr. Speaker, this information is right there in the budget, so there's no need to be misleading about that point. This was deliberate to ensure that those Bahamians who need to rely on the government for financial help as they face what we know are truly hard times, that they can find the support that they need. We also increased our allocation for food assistance program by $1.4 million to $14.2 million, and our subsistence support of persons contract by $0.3 million to $2.6 million per year. So, Mr. Speaker, there has been no cutting of the social assistance programs to those most vulnerable and in need of support. In fact, there was an increase, significant increase.
That section of your speech there.
Mr. Speaker. Are you suggesting that the Zuma was going to criticize us on that? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is the first budget in the history of the Bahamas that operates within the legally binding confines of the Fiscal Responsibility Act.
You don't like that.
A law that makes sure that government stays true to its priorities and policies while handling taxpayers' hard-earned money in a responsible and transparent way. Accordingly, the deficit projected for this year will in fact end up being the lowest deficit this country has seen in 10 years. And with its corresponding ratio marking the lowest deficit to GDP ratio this country has seen in almost 2 decades. Ultimately, the opposition would not know about these kinds of standards. They are more used to setting records like 4 consecutive downgrades and leading the Bahamas to junk bond status on the international credit market. Their track record includes $920 million in unrecorded bills to Bahamians and international vendors, running up unprecedented deficits and destroying the country's fiscal health and reputation. Between 2012 and 2017, our national economy actually shrank in size, Mr. Speaker, shrank in size from a level of $10.72 billion to a level of $10.6 billion for a net contraction of $123 million. And this despite an increase in the labor force of some 34,000 persons during that period. So the economy that the opposition wants to criticize this government about, under them, shrank. It got smaller. More people were struggling. Less opportunities for the people then than it is today with a growing economy at 1.6% over the last year and projected to continue growing. Mr. Speaker, what this data means is that during their 60-month term in office, their economic and fiscal management succeeded, if one can use such a term in this context, in leaving a legacy of an economy that was producing less goods and services than when they came into office.
Oh, no. We went backwards enough.
And let me repeat it again. The economy of the Bahamas in 2017 was in real terms smaller than it was in 2012 when they came into office. But yet, the leader of the opposition and the deputy leader wants to criticize this government about its track record over the last year in achieving 1.6% growth. There is a credibility problem, Mr. Speaker. There is a credibility problem. There's a deficit, credibility deficit. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. Any economy. You see, You see, Exuma and Ragged Island is my friend. And despite him being on that side, and despite him saying some things that he has to say for political reasons, I know that he knows better.
Don't be misled.
Like me, he's a former president of the Chamber of Commerce. He knows business. He knows the economy. And so for him to make the statements that he makes, I understand. I do politics too. I understand. But, you know, as I always say, don't let your credibility come into question in this whole thing.
Misled. No one's questioning him as deputy.
Exactly.
Same with us.
Any economist would find these figures jaw-dropping, Mr. Speaker. For the Bahamian people, they got the picture in 2017 when they fired that crew for the mismanagement of our, in addition to other things, but for the mismanagement of our economy and our public finances. Fired them, Mr. Speaker. During their 5 years in office, they registered an aggregate deficit of just under $2.4 billion, or about $500 million per year.
What? Again?
$500 million per year on average. Spending more than they take in, absolutely.
Drunk in the can.
To put that in perspective, no prior Bahamian government had ever remotely come close to posting such a result. Another record.
Another record. No, record. That's a record, not a record.
That means they do bad. The highlight, or perhaps more appropriately,
And they had 2 minutes.
the low light of their performance came in their last fiscal year, 2016-17.
I can talk a little bit about that too.
That year, the previous government collected some $2 billion from Bahamian taxpayers, which at the time was an unprecedented sum of tax dollars. That's the VAT money. No government in the Bahamas had ever pulled in so much tax money from the Bahamian people.
Oh, the PLP did that?
They did that.
Oh, man.
You know, it's amazing they had the heart to talk about value-added tax on the Bahamian people. When they introduced it, exactly. When they had an opportunity to practice fiscal restraint, they increased value-added tax to 7.5%.
From what?
And then from zero. That's 100%. They talk about 60% we raised it. They raised it 100%. And they want to talk about the measures we had to take to increase value-added tax, to cover the bills they left, the fiscal mess they left.
Yes.
They really got nerves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, indeed, despite raising over $2 billion in revenue off the backs of Bahamian taxpayers, they managed to spend over $2.7 billion with nothing to show for it but a mountain of unpaid bills.
I know. Giving all them contracts.
A frustrated populace and a lethargic economy. That's their record. But listening to them now, Mr. Speaker, despite the disaster that was their fiscal record, the same record they never reference when they speak about this government, they are now feigning concern over the fiscal health of the country. They're quick to provide advice to us on this side. But one has to wonder, and I can't direct this to Exuma and Ragged Island, but I could direct it to Cat Island, Rum Cay, and San Salvador and Angus. Where was the same fiscal hawkishness when you were in government? Why didn't you practice some of this? And this was only a couple of years ago, you know.
Me and Terry weren't on the same page.
Some of the same fiscal responsibility and the same accuracy in reporting GDP and all these numbers. Mr. Speaker.
No.
They are an exposed bunch, Mr. Speaker, which must...
Honorable members, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumpkins, and Salvador on a point of order.
First of all, the member spoke to the fact that the average deficit over the 5 years of our governance averaged 500 million each year. And never before in the history of governance that had ever happened. But he ought to know, and I've said it many times in here, that in 2000, the deficit, the actual deficit, not the manufactured deficit, right, which the central bank agreed to with which the monetary authorities agreed to with the fiscal authorities, was you asked me, was 545.2 million.
No, you could.
That's what we left. And if we, so Mr. Speaker, I could go back over the years and point to more times when I was so, right? But I'm just putting, no, Mr. Speaker, no, you asked me a question. And Mr. Speaker, no, Mr. Speaker, point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'm correcting him. I've asked point of order that the year 2012, 2013, the 2013, the actual deficit was $545.2 million. Right, which, Mr. Speaker, do not include all the unpaid bills that we left in the drawers. Right, we could talk. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
When you make your contribution, because you're going into a lot of detail, the member said that the average was 500 million, and you're speaking to specific amounts.
What I'm speaking to, Mr. Speaker, he's saying that never before in the history it happened. I'm pointing out to him that it happened in the year 2012, 2013 under their watch.
Honorable member.
I'm correcting him on that, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Keyword is on an average.
You are giving individual figures.
No.
The member spoke to averages. An average.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, but even if you take what he said is that the average deficit, the average overspent during the 5 years between 2012 to 2017 was 500 million. That's what he said.
That's a lie.
Average. I'm saying that is a lie.
Honorable member.
I can say that.
Honorable member.
Oh, he said that right. I withdraw lie, and I say it is far from the truth, because we can show, if we speak to that, I was about to point out, first of all, that average is not true, because it is reflected in the deficit over the years.
Honorable member.
And I have the record.
Honorable member. When you have an opportunity, you can lay out your figures.
No, Mr. Speaker, by the time I speak, the people can forget, and I might forget. So I'm correcting him now. Mr. Speaker, if he is wrong now, if he's misleading us now, I'm going to correct it now, and I have the right, Mr. Speaker. I would hope that you allow that thing. You, Mr. Speaker, will not want truths to...
Honorable member.
The truth matter, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what
Honorable member. The only point I'm pointing out to you is that I'm having a difficulty with you comparing average with specific figures.
No.
We know over a period of time, if you're dealing with an average, you can have a peak and you can have a valley, but it would average out at a certain amount. The member was speaking to averages, and you're speaking to specific figures.
But let me speak to average. The average number you spoke is not correct. He is still misleading, Mr. Speaker. It is misleading to say
So,
that
okay.
the average would be, the average is over 500 million, because I have the numbers right here. And I can share it if you want me to say that.
Honorable member,
In the year, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member.
let me call the numbers. In 2014, 2015, 368. 2015, 235. 2016,
In the handset booth.
782
Can you
million.
turn off the mic of the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador? Honorable member, I am trying to... the chair recognizes the honorable member
Due
for
respect to the
Sanaan.
member for Cat Island, this is not a point of order. He has his time for debate. The honorable member for East Grand Bahama is presenting his budget debate and the point to return. If he can't remember next week, that's his problem. But this is not a point of order.
The chair... honorable members, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, if a member stands and misleads the House, and I have the actual evidence to demonstrate that he is misleading the House, must I wait until I'm going to speak sometime later? Can I not stand now and say he needs to be corrected? Don't do that. I think I have that right, Mr. Speaker, because he is misleading now, and I want to correct the misleading now.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, this is why it's important to listen and for the Bahamian people to pay particular attention, so that they don't get confused with all of the noise and the misinformation and the amount of information that is being spewed out to try and confuse and conflate issues. Mr. Speaker, I was clear in what I said. Didn't speak about 1 year, spoke about an average. Okay? Well, you get a chance to prove that when you speak. Okay? Now, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
You know better.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time, and I don't want my time to stop, Mr. Speaker, because this is the second time in here, no, third time in here for the day that the member for Cat Island and the member for Exuma have uttered the word, "You're lying." Now, Mr. Speaker, in this honorable House, there is a tradition that those words are not used here, because we are all assumed to be honorable and to tell the truth in here, Mr. Speaker.
Doesn't matter.
Now, that doesn't mean that from time to time we don't get our facts wrong. That's legitimate, and that you can point that out. But nobody comes in here to call anybody a liar, because if you want to go that route, trust me, I can say some things about you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, you. Yes, you.
Honorable members.
I will.
Honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Please, resume your seat. Honorable member for Cat Island. You're not on a point of order. Resume your seat. The member for East Grand Bahama has the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Again, listening to them, you would think that they are the oracles.
Angels.
And I haven't even called them angels. I can't go there. Of fiscal responsibility. Mr. Speaker, they are in fact an exposed bunch. That's why you hear so much noise.
What is?
An exposed bunch. Uncovered.
Honorable member.
Yeah.
Honorable member.
You're exposed. What's wrong with that?
The word bunch.
Okay, I take that back.
Just like the word crew, we wouldn't want to use that word either.
Thank you.
I've heard those words used before.
Thank you, Mr.
But
Speaker.
we want to keep everything
Above board.
honorable,
Thank you.
you know.
But they are exposed, Mr. Speaker. With so much to say about fiscal rectitude while they are now in opposition. But when in office, they revert to their true form and proceed to set records in run-up of deficits and debt. I want to remind them that the Bahamian people are on to them and their fake concerns and crocodile tears. So whenever I hear the opposition trying to give us advice, Mr. Speaker, I have to remind them that they had their chance to manage this country's affairs, and they blew it. But now the same people who sat in cabinet then and were the architects of 4 consecutive downgrades and record deficits now want to give this government sound advice on fiscal matters. Shameless. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people have seen what their approach to budgetary matters has led to. So I want to ask them to understand that we are not prepared to take economic advice, fiscal, political, or government advice from the same people who led this country to 4 consecutive downgrades, down to junk bond status, our budgetary and fiscal affairs. I am simply not prepared to take your advice. Not from this junk bond crew.
Honorable member, the word crew, withdraw.
Take it back, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, do not get me wrong. On this side, we have a very open, consultative budget process that involves engaging citizens and listening to feedback from all parties. Mr. Speaker, we are particularly open to receiving input from civil society and other stakeholders when forming our fiscal policies. And I want to commend the various groups that we had consultation with leading into the budget this year, which was something new, where we engaged members of different sectors of the economy and the Chamber of Commerce to go through some of the policy thoughts that we had. It was a very open and a very informative discussion, I believe. No doubt, not everybody got what they want, but certainly I believe that it is another groundbreaking moment for governance in this country, where industry representatives get an opportunity to give their input into the way that they see the economy and the management of the fiscal affairs, as well as the incentives that are being considered, that they can put in their voice and hear the thinking of the government. So I want to congratulate them for the maturity in which all of the groups conducted themselves, and in fact, after the meeting, where we asked them to treat our discussions with the level of mutual respect that we would have liked it to be, and not to run to the public as some may want to do. I think they did a fantastic job in that, and I really want to commend them. And it lays the foundation for us to be more open and more transparent and have more regular or frequent meetings with these groups as we go forward. But Mr. Speaker, I mentioned last week that the Union of Musicians made representations on behalf of young people and the creative professionals across the Bahamas to remove duty on musical instruments. Upon consideration, we agreed that this would create more opportunities for young people, particularly those in poverty-stricken communities that rely on marching bands and junkanoo to engage young people in creative and productive activities. We agreed this would help to stimulate the creative industry by making it easier for musicians to invest in themselves and to flourish. Therefore, in this new budget, you will see duty removed on the musical instruments. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that there are many vulnerable populations that are suffering in poverty and need the support of the social safety net. We are providing resources to support these individuals, ensuring they receive the support that they need. Mr. Speaker, I will now turn to a detailed account of this administration's strategy for enhancing economic growth in a sustainable way. And member for Exuma, I want you to listen to this, because you're all about, the member is all about saying that we have no plan. So I think it's important that he listens to this in particular. Mr. Speaker, the domestic economy grew by approximately 1.6% in real terms in 2018. And the thing to note about that growth, Mr. Speaker, is according to the Department of Statistics, that was primarily private sector-led growth. That is different than government-led spending that drives GDP growth, because those programs, government spending has inherent ups and downs, because you start a project and employment goes up, GDP goes up, and then the program finishes and it crashes back down again. But private sector growth will see a more sustainable trajectory. And so it says that we are moving in the right direction. But despite this coming in lower than the 2.3% projected by the IMF, I want to pause for a moment to shed light, particularly for the opposition, on what exactly these projections entail. Again, I see them talking. They should really listen. Don't leave Cat Island. You need to hear this too.
Well, don't worry.
You can read?
Listen.
Okay. Well, I want you to listen, because I don't want you to be confused. Projections are boundaries that we set for ourselves based on a number of economic and social factors. Depending on the indicators, those boundaries help to guide and steer policy towards a particular outcome. As with any type of projection, a number of factors can alter the course towards the intended outcome. As such, these projections are not static. In fact, it is very rare, that any country hits their intended target on the nose. But it usually falls within an acceptable range around their target. There are potentially negative and positive consequences that can occur or affect whether or not you achieve the desired outcome. However, it is necessary to have this target that guides the direction to which we hope to steer the economy and to inspire and stretch the civil service to reach it. In knowing this, we have framed our economic growth agenda bearing these in mind. As we clearly explained in the budget communication, our government's overriding economic and fiscal policy philosophy and approach are diametrically opposed to that of the opposition. We have a concrete fiscal plan to reduce the deficit and return it to more desirable debt levels. At the same time, we are ensuring that we undertake those strategic reforms and initiatives that will strengthen consumer confidence and boost entrepreneurship and investment in our economy. As well, we are moving to reform and enhance the key structural factors that will underpin stronger potential economic growth, including investments in education and training, in renewable energy, in support for small and medium-sized businesses, and in improving regulations and reducing bureaucratic delays. Ours is the time-tested and sensible approach to economic and fiscal management and governance. It is the right-minded rather than self-serving thing to do. Mr. Speaker, when we improve business processes by eliminating the high level of bureaucratic inefficiencies incurred by individuals and companies doing business with the government, we create an incentive for Bahamians to start their own business or expand their existing businesses. When we address energy deficiencies, we increase our standard of living in an efficient way that ultimately cuts costs to the average consumer. When we make matching small and medium-sized businesses with capital avenues a priority, we empower Bahamians while helping them to create jobs and new products for our economy. This is what stimulating the economy is about. This is what guarantees sustainable growth for the long term. You see, the solution to our economic woes is not found in quick fixes. Instead, it is found in addressing the critical needs of the economy as it relates to both infrastructure and policy development. Exuma, this is an inspirational and aspirational budget. Empowerment of our citizens, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned before, our socio-economic agenda is one that embodies, nurtures, and ensures the evolution of human capacity. Our approach to enhancing economic growth is not founded on senseless overspending to secure votes or self-serving philosophies. We firmly believe that empowering the citizens of our nation by providing the necessary tools to advance themselves is what will drive long-lasting economic expansion. Gone are the days when Bahamians young and old we'll have to rely upon an MP, a bureaucrat, or a politician to start a business, to get that home or to get that job. And you know, Mr. Speaker, just this morning I got a WhatsApp from a friend of mine who laments the fact that despite being a very, very qualified individual, that he's finding it difficult to get a job. Because people keep asking him, and this is both on the government side and on the private sector side, keep asking him about his political views. And if you know who he is a political commentator. But it has nothing to do with his qualifications and what he's trying to accomplish for himself, what he's trying to contribute to this country. But people keep asking that question. And when it's a government supporter, he doesn't get the job. When it's an opposition supporter, he doesn't get the job because everybody's accusing him of being the other. That's unacceptable in a modern Bahamas. It's unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, it's not the government's role to hold its citizens handicapped to a system where going through a public official is the only route to getting anywhere in this country. Instead, it is the government's role to ensure that the correct policies are in place to endow its citizens with the power to build their lives and livelihoods for themselves. It's time to put the power back in the hands of the people, where it belongs, Mr. Speaker. It is the people's time. That is exactly what this minister-led administration is about, Mr. Speaker. We are determined to break the cycle of government dependency and instead create partnerships with Bahamians to advance their future. The policies we have listed in our 2017 manifesto, the very same ones we are putting into action, speaks largely to this. Our commitment to empowering the people is evident in our education and training initiatives. Very soon there will not be one Bahamian who will not have the opportunity to apply to one of the government's educational initiatives. From the University of the Bahamas, to the Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute, to high schools, and even to preschool. Each and every Bahamian will have the choice of taking advantage of these opportunities to better themselves and their families. You see, Mr. Speaker, investing in education is perhaps central to the growth of each citizen. Having access to education allows us the opportunity to build on human capital so that upon finishing tertiary education, we are made better candidates for employment opportunities or to shape our own entrepreneurial destiny. No doubt, no longer do we want Bahamians to be constrained by the lack of basic skills or ineligible for a job due to knowledge deficiency. And I'm sure the Minister of Education will speak more about this. What we want for them is to be able to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge so that they can be eligible for any job they desire or become equipped, again, to be their own boss. Making our citizens better equipped for the modern 21st century marketplace will secure higher employment and more entrepreneurship. When there is higher employment and more new small business activity, this means that people now have more disposable income to spend on goods and services. When people are consuming more, the economy is growing because businesses are benefiting from this higher consumption and subsequently putting those earnings back into the economy. And Mr. Speaker, when we talk about this growing economy and 1.6% growth in GDP, which is an abstract concept to a lot of Bahamians, what is not an abstract concept is that 3,777 new businesses have been established and issued licenses just within the last year. 3,777 new businesses. That's significant, that's real. Bahamians being empowered and Bahamians who are employing others through their empowerment. So if you can't understand 1.6% in a growing GDP, you can certainly understand that. New businesses starting, meaning new opportunities are being created. To show our support and commitment to our educational initiatives in this budget, we have allocated approximately $20 million to additional tuition and training funding at the University of the Bahamas and BTVI. The Prime Minister will speak more on this, as will the Minister of Education, and other educational initiatives that are in the pipeline when they give their contributions. Mr. Speaker, equipping our people with education is only one part of the approach to creating a brighter economic future. We believe that entrepreneurship is the critical pillar to spurring sustainable economic growth. As such, this government continues to make good on the Prime Minister's commitment of $25 million to support Bahamian entrepreneurs and small businesses over 5 years. Time and time again, for years and years, we've heard the cry that we need to do more to provide small businesses with the capital they need to start or expand their businesses. As we all know, micro, small, and medium-sized businesses make up the majority of our private sector. This means that if we do not move to develop them, we're not helping to build or expand the sector that will be able to provide the jobs we are seeking to prepare our citizens for. That is why our commitment and efforts towards the Small Business Development Center, or the SBDC, are so important to advancing our micro, small, and medium-sized businesses in order to support the level of productivity that is going to propel this economy to a sustainable level of growth. You listening, Exuma? Mr. Speaker, apart from receiving capital, these companies would have received adequate advice from business advisors to ensure that their businesses is ready for operation. In fact, the SBDC has advised nearly 500 small, new, and existing business individuals across the Bahamas. Since its inception, they have invested well over 67,000 hours in advising, training, courses, and research and site visits. Further, there are roughly 61 companies still in the pipeline that are in the development stage, where they're receiving advice and taking courses to be eligible for funding. It is estimated now that the funding that will be available to them is in the neighborhood of $7 million. This means more companies will be started. 3,777 last year, don't forget that number. More companies will be started. More companies will be expanding, and more dreams will be realized.
Yes. That's money on the ground.
Aspirational.
That's called aspirational.
That's aspirational.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker,
I still understand that.
after years and years of hearing the same old refrain that Bahamian small businesses need access to capital, this minister-led administration is actually doing something about it in a way that is tangible and demonstrable. No bunch of pretty talks, just a lot of action. Indeed, the economic impact that the activities of the SBDC will have on the Bahamian economy will be truly staggering. Just in the last 6 months of this year alone, and still very much in its infancy, the SBDC is expected to generate through its development of small businesses approximately 43 jobs, inclusive of new part-time and retraining jobs. Nearly $145,000 in salaries is expected to be created, while some $210,000 is anticipated to be retained. In addition, it is intended to garner the government some $197,000 in revenue through value-added tax, business license, customs duties, and NIB payments. All told, it is estimated that for every dollar that is invested in the SBDC by the government, an additional $5.58 is generated in economic growth. This real talk now, this real stuff. Pay attention, Exuma, pay attention. This means that every dollar invested in the SBDC creates an extra $5.58 in real dollars on account of the economic activity it creates through the businesses it would have helped. That's significant. And just for context, the average economic impact of entities such as the SBDC around the world is estimated at only $2.33.
Wow.
Which suggests that the activities of our SBDC are guided in a way that garners the most benefit per cost, and in a way that drives our economy at a rate that is higher than its global counterparts. We recognize, however, that our commitment to micro, small, and medium-sized businesses will have to extend beyond the activities of the SBDC. Our effort to enhance the ease of doing business will also stand to benefit this sector, as processes for starting a business and staying in business will and have been made relatively easier. Again, this is inspirational, imaginative, and aspirational, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this note, One very important component to garner the type of expansion we want to see in small business and ultimately in domestic growth is advancing the ease of doing business in the Bahamas. Currently, the Bahamas is ranked 118th out of 190 countries on the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, which equates to an average score of 58.9%. It is our goal to significantly improve this position. And one of the key areas that has been identified has been the need of improvement with the protection of minority investors. To address this, we drafted the Securities Industries Amendment Bill 2019 and the Companies Amendment Bill 2019, which both seek to address deficiencies as they relate to protecting minority investors, as well as provide for additional transparency in shareholder governance. And Mr. Speaker, this will help to stimulate the capital markets here in the Bahamas as minority investors have some assurance that they will not be taken advantage of by the majority. They have remedies and protection. And that will provide more capital, more willingness to provide capital from private sector angel investors. In addition to drafting the appropriate legislation, we created an interagency working group that will focus specifically on the areas of weaknesses in our current structure that complicate doing business in this country. Those areas include getting credit, registering property, protecting minority interests, trading across borders, getting electricity, dealing with construction permits, and starting a business. Mr. Speaker, these efforts have indeed borne fruit. At the end of April, I am pleased to say that we've seen substantial time improvements across a number of processes. Compared to last year, persons now get their business license 37% faster, and renewals 77% faster, while the time it takes to get a property conveyance registered has fallen by 44%. Additionally, it now takes 12% less time to get a construction permit approval than it did last year. Thanks to these changes, people are in business faster, construction projects are starting faster, and people are now spending less time transferring properties. These are real-time impacts that people are feeling due to the work of this government. The continued progress of the working groups, coupled with the modernization and digitization projects that are ongoing to improve efficiency and accuracy, will have an indelible positive impact on business processes in the Bahamas, and particularly in respect to interactions with the government. Simplifying the process of clearing customs alone could incentivize persons to create their own businesses, as the process will not be overly complicated and time-consuming. In addition, securing a stronger level of tax compliance across our archipelago of islands will essentially support an expansion in our resources, making us better equipped to match capital needs with entrepreneurial ideas. The more resources we have, the more we can spend on programs that better serves our citizens, not just from a social standpoint, but to actually empower them for success. Investing in increasing the ease of doing business in the Bahamas does not work solely for the benefit of foreign investors, but also for the benefit of every Bahamian with a dream to become a business owner. It works to the benefit of existing businesses who are trying to expand and help their economy via their own operations, or by providing better services, better products, and in some cases, more jobs for our country. Mr. Speaker, this is why I put forward our endeavor best to stay the course on our journey to fiscal reform, upon which this budget was guided. In doing a deep dive analysis on our fiscal indicators, however, it is clear now, more than ever, that our policy focus must shift to the improvements in the administration and collection of existing revenue, while still paying careful attention to expenditure discipline. We expect that the continued revenue enhancement initiatives that we have employed to strengthen the overall revenue administration will help to boost revenue to GDP ratio. At the 10 months to April mark, we have secured approximately $1.9 billion in total revenue. VAT collections total $699.3 million, which represented a 21.5% increase over the previous fiscal period and 66% of the budgeted amount. As we mentioned in the midterm statement, we expect for these receipts to come in lower. Listen, Zuma. As we mentioned in the midterm statement, in case you missed it. We expect for these receipts to come in lower than intended as a result of the time-related delays in payments at the new rate versus the old rate due to the concessions granted to hotels and the construction sector. Nevertheless, we are confident that revenue performance in the last 2 months of 2018-19 fiscal year will be in line with our current projections. So when I hear the side opposite say that we are, and this is the word again, when I hear the side opposite say we are lying to Bahamian citizens and misstating the facts, I suggest that they check the numbers. And they check them good, Mr. Speaker. And I know Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador left to go check his numbers. So I hope he's using a good calculator and using somebody who understands the numbers. But they say we're lying. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
That's
Please,
the word,
please
Mr. Speaker.
don't put that word back on the record.
No, but that's on the record in the newspaper. They use that word deliberately in the newspaper. And it is as offensive there as it is in here. But we are not, in fact, in need of collecting 42% of our annual revenue in April. You know, again, Exuma, this ain't for you. This ain't for you. You didn't use this particular word. So stay out of that one. We are not, in fact, in need. But you did speak about this, so you should pay attention to this part. We are not, in fact, in need of collecting 42% of our annual revenue in April, May, and June. And VAT collections have, in fact, increased by 16%. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not surprised that the leader of the opposition would accuse me of that bad word. Telling an untruth to the Bahamian people. You see, Mr. Speaker, that's what he knows. And what they expect from government. Because that is, in my opinion, what they probably engaged in. That's likely how their administration, in my opinion, operated. And Mr. Speaker, it also gives an indication to the Bahamian people, their modus operandi and their thinking. If they were ever to get the chance, heaven forbid, to run the affairs of this country again. Never. You see, this whole fiscal transparency and being deliberate and open with the Bahamian people is a new thing to them. It's a concept that they think alien, that they can't understand. Even to the point where opening yourself up to criticism, warranted and unwarranted, pointing out some of the unfavorable things that have happened. They expect you to lie, to cover it, to try and come up with some story, to make it look good to the Bahamian people. This minister, this ministry, this government, it's not about fooling the Bahamian people. This is a modern day, Mr. Speaker, this is the 21st century. Where information is available at the click of a mouse. Where you can be fact-checked on the minute. So, you know, but there is no. So, Mr. Speaker, this whole thing that the leader of the opposition, I'm disappointed, quite frankly. I'm disappointed that they would use that line. You can disagree with me in philosophy. You can disagree with me even in interpretation of the numbers. But to go out and to say to the public that the Minister of Finance is lying to the Bahamian people, you don't have any idea what you're saying? No, Central Andrews.
Honorable member, the member for Mangrove Key, South and Central Andrews, on the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, you made a ruling some time ago this morning about the use of the word lie. This is the second time that the member for East Grand Bahama, in his substantive presentation as the Minister of Finance of this country, has now gone ahead and used the same word. And not being asked to withdraw we are seeking redress to this matter because of the member for East Grand Bahama could use the word lie so flagrantly, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, you have not asked him to, he's done it twice in the last 2 minutes.
Honorable member. Honorable member, if I may, that statement that you just made is not absolutely correct. I just asked the member not to put that word
He's done it twice since you asked, Mr. Speaker.
on the record.
He's done it twice since you've asked, since standing right here.
Defying you.
He's defying your ruling, Mr. Speaker. In this honorable place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I hope that you would intimate yourself in this process and bring honor and decorum to your house, please.
Honorable members and members in the Hansard, any reference using the word lie or lying is hereby expunged from the records. Thank you. The chair recognizes the honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I would only ask you for one addition to that, though, is if you're going to delete the word lying, then I suggest that we put in the word untruth. Otherwise, it has no context.
Yes, that's the read, bro.
But, Mr. Speaker,
Yes, I take the recommendation from the honorable member for East Grand Bahama that wherever the word lie appears, we substitute untruth.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, it is interesting. It is interesting that, you know, the member from South Andrews would seek to correct me, but when his member, his leader, stood right there today, much less in the paper. No, Ken Island, the real leader, man. The other one feels so aspirational. That's the aspirational that Exoma is talking about. She got aspiration.
That's a big aspiration.
But she stood right there and used that word, Mr. Speaker. But I didn't hear South Andrews say anything about that. But he's concerned about the honor and decorum of this House. We mustn't be duplicitous, Mr. Speaker. I don't expect that. I expect better. It's my friend. Do better. Do better. But, Mr. Speaker, yeah, I agree, but not here today. Mr. Speaker. I thank you for that. I thank you for that. Despite what we might do in here, I know you and Exuma, y'all got my back. I know. You got to do what you got to do. But, Mr. Speaker, they know better, you know. They know better. They know better. But, Mr. Speaker, need I remind the leader of the opposition that when it comes to telling untruth, it was he who stood right here, right in this exact spot, as the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Leader of his party, and told the Bahamian people in that camera, that one there, told a bold-faced untruth. That's his record, Mr. Speaker. But he wants to call me in the public a name that I can't repeat in here. But he stood in here, looked at that camera, and told the Bahamian people the Bamsi building that burned down in Andrews had insurance. He was the minister responsible, so he should have known. He said, here. Yeah. And you know what is so brazen about that and what is so egregious about that? After it happened, they had the nerve to come in here. It cost $3 million to build. They come in here to say, oh, now to rebuild it, we got to pay the same contractor $5 million. But I'm the untruth teller. Mr. Speaker, if you don't want to go that far back, let's go back to last week. Mr. Speaker, when both Cat Island, Rumpke and San Salvador, and Exuma and Ragged Island had press conferences. They had, I don't know, I guess it was some kind of media event or something just on Monday. But last week it was them. No, man, somebody sent me the clip. They were right there. Right? Mr. Speaker, telling the Bahamian people
another bold-faced untruth, unfounded, Mr. Speaker, when they claim value-added tax going up. Trying to rile the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, trying to rile the people up.
Honorable member, the member for Exuma, Ragged Island,
Mr. Speaker,
on the point of
East
order.
Bahama is misleading. There is nowhere at no time was I ever involved in any public discussion indicating that value-added tax would increase. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, he has indicated that I, along with the member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador, together at a press conference, indicated that VAT was going up. This member is a stranger to the truth, Mr.
Yes,
Speaker.
thank you very much. That's a good one.
Exuma is my friend. And I hate to have to do this to him.
He was supposed to be over here with us,
Right?
you know.
Yeah, I know. But either, Mr. Speaker, Exuma and Ragged Island is telling an untruth, or the media
Just like you did to me.
is telling an untruth. Now, I don't know, because I wasn't there. That's true.
Honorable
I
member,
wasn't there.
the member for Exumas and Ragged Island,
Speaker,
on the point of order.
the member has made certain accusatory remarks in relation to me and the Leader of the Opposition. I have indicated that it's not true, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking that he withdraw it, Mr. Speaker. I'm demanding that he withdraw it.
Honorable member for Exumas, precisely what?
Some press conference where I and the leader said VAT was going up. It never happened, Mr. Speaker. And I'm asking that he withdraw it immediately, Mr. Speaker.
He never said it. Never said it.
Never said
Chair
it.
recognizes honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to suggest that the member may not have recalled this particular line, but he might want to check the record.
Can refresh my memory, which is impossible to do so, Mr. Speaker, on this issue because it never happened, Mr. Speaker. I'm asking that you require this member to withdraw a false statement that he's putting on the record of the House. He's misleading the Bahamian people. He's misleading the House, Mr. Speaker. Just withdraw it, man. Be honorable.
But I said it.
Chair recognizes.
So, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to help the House. I'm going to help the House, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to withdraw that at the moment while I get the newspaper clippings to prove the statement. I just want to reserve the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to read that statement back into the record at some future opportunity. No, I don't understand why the member wants to take this tack. This was said. Okay, I'm gonna, like I said, somebody ain't telling the truth. Either it's the media or it's here. Well, again, you go with that word again, and that's a difficult word. Mr. Speaker.
31st of May.
So 31st of May, Google it.
I need to finish that right beside
Google it. 31st of May. What's that, the Tribune?
What's the Guardian?
Or the Guardian? The Guardian. The Guardian. The Guardian outrage.
Honorable member.
About planned VAT hike. I'm going to bring it back, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to bring it back so that I can lay it for the member so he can see it.
Thank you,
Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, again, as I say, don't sacrifice your credibility in here. Life goes on after this. Yeah, you should. I agree. As I said, click of the mouse. You can pretty much hear anything I say. It says, and I'm just going to read this just if you allow me, Mr. Speaker, because it is from a phone.
Yes, honorable member, just state the source and the date.
Yeah, so it's the Jones Communication, or jonesbahamas.com website, and it says, the headline is, Cooper cautions government over possible 15% VAT increase. The Bahama Journal. the 12th of June, 2017, Cooper cautions government over a possible 15% VAT increase. Value-added tax could later result in a possible 15%. Opposition Shadow Minister of Financial Services, Chester Cooper. Now, maybe that's a different Chester Cooper.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
Mr. Speaker, I asked that he lay it on the table. And we will ensure that the context ties in with what he said. He accused me, Mr. Speaker. No. Context is important. Context is important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if I said could lead to, it doesn't mean that I said that they are going to do it, Mr. Speaker. The words he used and accused me of never happened, Mr. Speaker. And I asked that he lay it on the table. That will kill it. Yeah.
To the lawyer. No. Mr. Speaker, again, as I said, and again I think as is demonstrated today, credibility is important, Mr. Speaker. It should be important. So when they talk about who telling untruths, I think we have ably demonstrated. We ably demonstrated who tells the truth and who doesn't, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, clearly, the Emperor is naked and lacks credibility. And I encourage the Bahamian people to not forget this record of consistent failure, Mr. Speaker, by the side opposite. Shameless untruths, Mr. Speaker, shameless untruths, even today. Even today. And I'm disappointed, Mr. Speaker. I'm disappointed for the opposition. I'm disappointed for the Bahamian people. We can do better, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker,
Dinosaur.
The truth is, all told, we are poised to meet our legally binding fiscal targets without the need to increase value-added tax rates, levy new taxes, or undertake draconian measures. Although if you let the opposition tell it, we would have driven the economy into another recession by now. But again, unlike them, we understand the premise of good and proper budgeting. They have shown us all too well, sadly, the effects of having no fiscal plan. Staying the course will move us closer to a balanced budget. It will signal to our people that we are serious about the course of action we have pursued. Remaining true to our targets will also bring us much closer to cleaning up our fiscal affairs so as to create a brighter, better future for this generation and for the youth that will follow. Our opposition, as opposed to burdening them to pay the debt of today, tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, in our commitment to fiscal reform, we vow to embody transparency and accountability while doing so. This is precisely what the establishment of an independent fiscal council will do come July 1. As an independent body, it is their duty to assess the fiscal affairs of the government, to ensure that it maintains its fiscal targets, and that it is conducting its use of public resources in a way that is beneficial to the greater good of Bahamians. Over the last few years, the use of independent fiscal councils have become particularly pronounced in the Caribbean region. Countries rely heavily on the role of the council to ensure policymakers do not run up excessive deficits and pursue anti-cyclical policies. Research has shown that globally, their efforts have been quite fruitful, with empirical evidence supporting the conclusion that the presence of fiscal councils is indeed associated with more accurate fiscal forecasts and a greater compliance in fiscal guidelines. And just in our region, Mr. Speaker, some would have seen in the news reporting where one of our neighbors to the south is doing remarkably well, participating and coming out of an IMF program. No doubt they receive direct assistance from the IMF and the IDB, but they also have a fiscal council that is helping them to shape long-term sustainable policies. So we know that these fiscal councils can work if they're used appropriately, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, even with our accountability, and transparency efforts, we must remain in this and in future budgets, not only on focusing on strengthening the efficiency of expenditure management, but also enhancing the collection of government revenue. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to a brief review of revenue enhancement measures in this budget as we shift our policy focus to shoring up government receipts. Mr. Speaker, as expected, the members of the opposition had quite a bit to say in the lead-up to the budget communication. In fact, the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador insisted that they had no confidence, and even in today's newspaper, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, said they had no confidence in our ability to effectively and practically manage the public finances because we had missed critical fiscal targets in the last year. Need I remind him, or remind them, to remove the log from their own eyes before they try to take the splinter out of ours. History shows, and the data supports it, that in their last term in office, the PLP completely missed their revenue targets in 4 out of 5 years.
They missed everything.
4 out of 5 years, they missed their fiscal targets. Throughout the duration of the PLP's last term in office, they missed 80% of their revenue targets, as receipts fell short of what they said they would collect. So you hear them all over the place, Mr. Speaker, talking about, oh, they increased VAT and it's slowing down the economy and then doom and gloom and the world is going to crash. Yet, we had 1.6% GDP growth. The economy expanded, Mr. Speaker. But these same individuals, well, I can take Exuma out of this because he was in there. But certainly Cat Island and Eggleston were there. These same people who are now all in the public all over the place talking about, oh, they lie to the Bahamian. Sorry, can I take that back? They are telling untruths to the Bahamian people. They are giving misleading numbers because the proof is that they did not meet their fiscal targets. 4 out of 5 years, they didn't meet their target. So were they telling the truth? Or were they lying to the Bahamian? Sorry, take that word back again, sorry. Were they misleading the Bahamian people? You see, you got to remember, each of us has a record. And as I say, at the touch of a mouse, you can get that record. But Mr. Speaker, it gets worse. Despite completely missing their deficit targets for 4 out of the last 5 years that they were in office, they overshot their deficit even in the year they collected more than they anticipated that they would. So in the 1 year out of 5 that they collected more revenue than they anticipated, they still, Mr. Speaker, exceeded their deficit, meaning they spent even more. They collected more and spent more, Mr. Speaker. And so they still exceeded their deficit targets. Throwing it on the ground, eh? You probably did. Spending like drunken sailors, somebody said. I don't know. In 2015-16, Mr. Speaker, they collected an estimated $166 million more than they had projected, but still managed to miss their deficit target by a whopping $169 million. You believe that, Mr. Speaker? They collected $166 million more than they expected and still spent more by $169 million. So what does that tell us about their style of governance? This is the ill-founded, that it is rudderless, and it had no regard for the lives of Bahamian people. And they want to tell me about budgeting and about revenue performance. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, come on. Mr. Speaker, we are, however, different. With an explicit focus on improving our revenue collection, we are further bolstering an improvement in the public financial position, while at the same time providing financial resources to fulfill the government's transformational policies and priorities in a fiscally responsible manner. I want to be clear that when we speak of enhancing revenue collections, we are not alluding to an increase in current tax rates or the imposition of any new taxes. Rather, we are focused on shoring up government revenues that is currently in the market, but is simply not collected due to antiquated systems, a lack of cooperation at the interagency level, other administrative impediments, or downright inadequate compliance on the part of taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, I will now address the measures we have outlined in this budget to provide tax relief to each and every citizen. Mr. Speaker, another key priority of this government is to ensure that the Bahamian people are able to feel the impact of our policy decisions in a tangible way. And I won't speak about the programs that the Prime Minister is championing through his office and his Over the Hill initiative, because I think that is truly transformational in a real, tangible, significant, listen to this, Exuma, imaginative and creative and innovative and aspirational and innovative and imaginative way. Inspirational way. But I'm going to leave that for the Prime Minister to talk about.
He said that, right?
That is why we have attempted to provide a number of tax relief measures in this budget that should be felt by all. You should probably go take that line out of the budget, I think. On your contribution, take that line out. We took a deep look at the most frequently imported items based on data we received from the Customs Department. From that list, we identified those items that were more relatable to the average household in the Bahamas and tailored our working list to include school supplies and household implements. And this is in addition to the measures that we already did last year. So we're just adding. Now, apartment-sized fridges and stoves are duty-free for Bahamian people. That is under 30 inches. That young couples or that young millennials can go out on their own for the first time, who are going out on their own for the first time, are able to set themselves up without killing their budget with high customs duties. Parents and teachers can now stock up on school supplies for students for a lower price due to the duty reductions and in some cases removal. And I just want to comment there, Mr. Speaker, that we do not lower these duties to encourage people to go foreign to buy their school supplies. We want them to buy them locally. Yep. We encourage all of us to patronize local stores. And so the duty reductions apply to the businesses that are importing these goods also. But one of the big complaints that I keep getting is that we've reduced these duties, and the value-added tax on the bread basket items, for instance, but it is not flowing through to the consumer in the way that it has been intended.
Very true.
And I just want to make this appeal to the business community to understand that this is a partnership. This is very much a partnership between ourselves as the government, you as the commercial entity, and the consumer. All of us doing our part. And when we reduce the cost for the Bahamian people, we expect the Bahamian consumer to benefit. Not for an opportunity to increase profit, but to pass on those savings. And the truth of the matter is, if we do that, we encourage more of our consumers to buy it at home because the prices become competitive and the thought of going to the United States or elsewhere to purchase, the cost outweighs the benefit. And so more people will purchase at home. And so I just ask for a little bit more consideration and sophistication in the pricing models so that we can all benefit from this increasing pie that we're trying to create. The National Youth Band, the Bahamas All-Star Band, and every other orchestra or band and jungle group assembled in the Bahamas can now expand their members as instruments are now cheaper to purchase. I know for the jungle group that I support in Grand Bahama, I know that's music today is. No pun intended. And I'm sure the member for Central knows who I'm talking about. A child who has always wanted to learn to play the trumpet may now be able to afford to purchase one. With strong dedication and a lot of practice, this could mean opportunities to play in the National Arts Festival, which could eventually lead to international exposure, college scholarships, and much, much more. These are the types of tangible effects we expect to see as we set policy, Mr. Speaker. And that Bahamas All-Star Band, I think we should all as a country be proud of. Chris Distillion deserves tremendous credit for that group. Because, Mr. Speaker, not all of us can be athletes. Not all of us can be athletes. But some of us can play instruments. Some of us are brilliant academically. Some of us can write poetry and play golf and all kind of other things. And all of these, we have to build those talents so that we give our children the best opportunity to excel at tertiary education and be able to get a scholarship, way if that's their desire, and really expose themselves. So that's what this is all about, providing opportunity for our young people. Adding to that, Mr. Speaker, we provide a sense of tax relief for the Bahamian people in a number of tax measures in this and in previous budgets, as I mentioned. We made the water bills under $50 and electricity bills under $300 zero-rated under value-added tax. And last week in my communication, we announced that this would be permanent. I also stated that 23,000 households would have benefited from this initiative. I want to clarify that estimate at this time, and Exuma, you could have said I was telling an untruth in this particular respect. I want to clarify an estimate that I mentioned during the communication. After questions in the media about our projections of 60,000 beneficial households made last year, I said that 23,500 households were only accounted for those who would have benefited from the zero rating I said in the communication last year that 23,000 homes had benefited from these concessions to eliminate VAT on water and electricity under the specified rates. That was wrong, Mr. Speaker. And I admit and I apologize to the opposition and to the Bahamian people. I was wrong. Households that benefit from the zero rating on electricity bills actually averaged 79,000 households. Not 23,000, Mr. Speaker. 79,000.
I like mistakes like that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Which represents approximately 84%. Listen to that, Mr. Speaker. Which represents approximately 84% of the residential consumers in New Providence and the Family Islands. 84%. As old as everybody in Exuma, you're right. 84% of households in New Providence and the Family Islands benefited from that value-added tax exemption. So in total, the amount of consumers that are benefiting from this change actually surpassed our initial estimate of 60,000. You see, Mr. Speaker, when they talk about us not doing anything for the people and only focusing on fiscal numbers, but not doing things that people can feel in their pockets, it begs me to question their perspective of governance and what it means to act in the interest of our people. If we're providing tax relief so that 79,000 households in this country do not have to pay an extra 7.5% that they put on their water and electricity bills, is not in the best interest of the people, I shudder to think what the opposition thinks is in the best interest of the people. These examples vividly demonstrate that unlike our predecessors, we do not just talk about change, we actually implement change. Mr. Speaker, this administration set a very strict 3-year plan to bring our fiscal house in order. We set defined fiscal rules that would bind us to prudence, responsibility, fairness, and transparency. A year later, we are before this House not only determined to meet the objectives we set out in the previous fiscal year, but we are also heavily committed to the targets we set for the subsequent 2 years. We have remained true to what we established as a new era of public financial management and have made an example to the Bahamian people of what an accountable, transparent, and fiscally responsible government looks like. We have certainly had to make some tough decisions, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, raising the value-added tax rate to 12% was not an easy decision. However, we knew that in order to bring fiscal affairs in order, we had to make a hard call that would most likely create some discomfort initially, but would ultimately be for the better of this country. The evidence today shows exactly that. Things are improving. The policy position that we took is working, Mr. Speaker. And the numbers, not me, the numbers show it. And so I thank the Bahamian people for the patience and the confidence that they put in us last year when we set out this 3-year program. We are in the middle of it, and yes, it is uncomfortable. But I think the fruits are showing that the position and the decisions that we took as a people, as partners, are in fact working, and they are bearing the results, the fruits that we said and we outlined that they would. Stay with us. Promise made, promise kept. Mr. Speaker, I believe the honorable member for Exuma and Ragged Island stated around this time last year that the increase in the value-added tax rate was reckless and dangerous. Well, here we are 1 year later with a stronger economy, a booming tourism sector, which is subject to value-added tax, by the way, a number of capital, educational, and reform projects underway and in the pipeline, a young entrepreneurial sector that is growing day by day. Here we are 1 year later, Exuma and Ragged Island, with our deficit projections projected to fall exactly where we intended it to fall, and appreciably lower than the previous year. Mr. Speaker, though our efforts towards fiscal responsibility and stability may call for some sacrifice, I urge my fellow members and my fellow Bahamians to see the measures within this budget for the good that they will instill, rather than lose them in the clouds of fiscal restraint, or as some like to say, austerity. Yes, we have had to place some constraints, but we are doing palpably, we are doing much better. Palpably. More, even with less resources. Appreciably better. We're investing in clean energy to improve the daily lives of our citizens. We're investing in improving and expanding educational opportunities available to our citizens. We are streamlining business processes to increase efficiency and customer service within the government. And we're making doing business and staying in business easier across the system. We're bridging the gap in financing for micro, small, and medium enterprises. We're building and developing young entrepreneurs to become successful businessmen, men and women, in pursuit of realizing their greatest dreams. We're making a stronger, better Bahamas. We're in the business of right budgeting and prudent spending. We're in the business of paying our bills, as opposed to spending frivolously and letting arrears build up. We are bringing meaning to the words transparency and accountability, and not just saying them. This is why it is even more pertinent to remain committed to this new public financial management. Our deficit has been on the downward trajectory since this administration took office. We have lowered our deficit and get our debt on a downward trajectory to a sustainable level of no more than 50% of GDP, while shoring up our revenues in our fight against non-compliance. We will undoubtedly have more resources to vote to other areas of social reform that will have an inevitable impact on the lives of our people. We will have more resources to dedicate to educational initiatives, better health care, addressing our infrastructure needs, and improving trade across borders. Now, Mr. Speaker, before I turn to just a summary of the proposed legislation that is included as a part of the package of budget bills that we are debating today, I must speak to East Grand Bahama. Firstly, I want to thank the residents for their continued support and encouragement, and to let them know that they continue to be the wings beneath my wings. The wind between my wings, beneath my wings. You know, yeah, extra wings.
Hey, you flying so high,
the truth of it is that, when you feel the way you feel about your constituents, and I do,
Yes.
You sometimes get a little choked up. Yeah, a little choked up. You think about it. And because those people know how very special I think they are, and the regard that I hold them. But they are the wind beneath my wings, Mrs. Speaker. Yeah, I'm getting messed up and stuff. And I want to send a shout out to my hard-working constituency team who hold down the affairs of the constituency while I attend to national matters. It's not easy being a cabinet minister from a family island, and I'm sure North Abbott can tell you. Because people want to see you. They expect you to be there like you used to be, but it's impossible. Yep. And so it's so important to have a strong constituency team, so that you can still, people can still see you through your team. And so I want to thank them because they do commit and sacrifice a lot for their member of parliament, for me personally. And so I want to thank them for the work that they do. This upcoming fiscal year, the Minister of Works has identified a number of infrastructure projects that will be completed, including the high rock seawall that needs repair, the Sweeting Ski Channel that needs clearing, the garbage collection issues throughout the area, and other maintenance projects that are necessary. We're particularly excited about the empowerment projects that are underway in Waterkey, throughout the constituency, from Coral Road all the way to Sweeting Ski. The opportunities are being provided through the Small Business Development Center, and some innovative projects that are already launched and are about to be launched in the area. We will continue our social and heritage festival support programs, as well as our assistance programs to individual families and persons. Working with partners, we expect to see new investment projects come to the area that will bring economic opportunity from east to west, not including the Carnival project, the hotel projects, and others that I'm sure the Prime Minister will speak to when he gives his contribution. I truly believe that 2019-20 will be a good year for Grand Bahama.
Yes.
And so I say to our people to remain focused. There are those who would come and spread seeds of discontent, but we have experience with them, Mr. Speaker. You know, and as I've demonstrated earlier,
Yes.
you can't listen to everything they say.
No.
Because they are masters of deception and misinformation. Stay focused, Grand Bahama. Stay focused. Things are getting better. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, you know, I spoke about 3,777 businesses being licensed, new businesses being licensed in the Bahamas. 177 of those businesses was in Grand Bahama.
Yes.
So when people say the economy of Grand Bahama is dying, it's an untruth, Mr. Speaker. 177 new business people have been registered and are operational, hiring people, and producing and helping to boost that economy in Grand Bahama. And more is to come, Mr. Speaker. More is to come. Mr. Speaker, lastly, I turn to a review of the bills we have tabled with this budget that underpin the objectives we are intending to materialize, particularly with regard to tax relief and revenue enhancement initiatives. One, the Business License Amendment Regulation 2019 seeks to add the definition of turnover and eliminates export services revenue from business license tax calculations. That means, Mr. Speaker, if a Bahamian is providing a service from the Bahamas to another jurisdiction outside the Bahamas, they will no longer have to pay business license on that turnover. That is a significant advantage to service providers here in this country and will encourage them, hopefully, to look for markets overseas so that we can broaden our economic opportunities. Because the Bahamas is only 370,000 or so people. There's only so much internal growth we can get from that market. And so we have to look overseas to broaden the market for our goods and services, particularly as competition picks up internally and externally. And so we're removing the business license tax on all that income that may be derived from providing service overseas. And so whether you're looking at the tech hub that may get into coding and programming, whether you look at medical billing, which is an area that is open because it's being done in India and it's being done in other Caribbean countries,
but we can do medical coding for U.S. companies, for instance. We can do software development. We can do architectural services. We can do accounting services, finance services, all kinds of services that we can offer to the international community that will no longer attract business license tax here in the Bahamas. The Excise Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to amend the first schedule to the Excise Act to allow for new 10% duty rates on new or used hybrid or electric vehicles not exceeding $50,000, and to provide for consequential amendments to the schedule of the Tariff Act and the insertion of a new tariff code and subheadings to effect other budget changes. The Stamp Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to effect change in policy from the payment of stamp tax on real property to the payment of value-added tax on real property. And this is a consequence, Mr. Speaker, of all of the changes we had to make in order to comply with the international community with respect to the European initiative. So we're moving real property from stamp tax to the value-added tax regime. And Mr. Speaker, in that amendment, there is now a provision that a family or the owner of property can transfer his property from himself or his company to a direct relative of his, or to a company that is beneficially owned by him without incurring stamp tax. That is a significant advancement in estate planning for a lot of Bahamians. Even when you think about family islands where generational land may be in a family sitting there, owned by somebody, but they can't afford to transfer it to their heir or to somebody in the family, because in order to do so, they're going to have to incur stamp tax under the old regime. So that heir or that person that you want to give it to can't use the land to gain capital or the financing to build something. But now, the owner of that land can transfer it to their child or to their family member without stamp tax, and that family member can now use that land to generate economic activity. So this is a real benefit to Bahamians. Customs Management Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to require the registration of individuals, business, companies, customs brokers, and other couriers with the Customs Department who import or export from or within the customs territory on behalf of themselves or others. The Spirit and Beer Manufacturing Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to repeal Section 5 of the Act, which limited licensees whose distilleries had the capacity of 400 bushels of grain or more, and to provide an exception that microbreweries, which is a phenomenon that is growing, are not required to have a bonded warehouse. The clause further seeks to provide for a definition of what is a microbrewery. Value-Added Tax Amendment Bill 2019 seeks to amend a myriad of definitional changes and typographical errors to include for the registration of persons in e-commerce, conducting vacation home rentals on marketplaces to ensure zero rating on water utilities and electricity bills, permanent, and to make all realty transactions subject to VAT as opposed to stamp tax. So again, Mr. Speaker, this is an important change also, because again, this is a direct response to a global move towards digital transactions. And so we're saying that for those marketplaces or those platforms that provide services to the Bahamas digitally, they will now be subject to value-added tax in the Bahamas, because this is where the benefit is being derived. And as a result, we are due the taxes on that activity. Real Property Tax Amendment Bill seeks to alter the definition of owner-occupied property, and it raises the level of the stamp tax liability from $50,000 to $60,000 on higher-end properties. The City of Nassau Revitalization Act and the Family Island Development and Management Amendment Bill 2019 seek to extend the duration of these acts to 2024. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this opening contribution to the 2019-20 budget debate, I wish to reiterate that this budget is guided by the very principles on which this government stands.
Honorable member.
Those are transparent. Mr. Speaker, I'm wrapping up. Mr. Speaker,
I know it's a lot of good news. Yeah, I know it's a lot of good news. And I know your head's swinging right now. I understand. But take it easy. I'm wrapping up now. Mr. Speaker. I'm finished. No, less than that. Oh, I got 15 more minutes? Oh, I got 15 more minutes. No, why are you rushing me? I got 15 minutes. I know, man. So, Anders, I would never insult you. Never insult you.
You got another 15 minutes.
That Anders is my friend. I would never insult him, Mr. Speaker, as I would no one in this House. But, Mr. Speaker, this budget is guided by the very principles on which this government stands. Those are transparency, accountability, inclusivity, and citizen empowerment. This budget stands for a government that is a better partner to the Bahamian people, that delivers real and sustainable benefit, that allows Bahamians to be empowered and independent.
Yes.
I cannot emphasize enough. We want to break the cycle of poverty and the dependence on government.
Yes.
This will allow Bahamians to have the fundamental benefits we all desire: good health, a good education for our children, security, social progress for our families, economic stability, and an overall better future. When we came to office, we made it our mandate to ensure that Bahamians came first, as opposed to the personal interest of any politician. That was then, and it still remains true now. Each of our policies have been crafted to benefit every social class within the Bahamas across all of our major industries. This budget invests in comprehensive structural reforms that are going to make the government work better and be better. The ease of doing business, from the ease of doing business to the digital transformation, from the focus on tax fairness and the overhaul of revenue administration and collection, from the adoption of transparent and accountable fiscal practices to the overhaul of state-owned enterprises. This budget invests in strategic projects and programs that are going to build 21st century infrastructure and set a new foundation for growth that will make education more inclusive and help Bahamians to break the cycle of poverty. Exuma and Ragged Island, that's aspirational. While we have made great progress, we're not done yet. There's still a tremendous amount of work to do. We remain committed to putting Bahamians first and truly partnering with them to advance the social and economic fiber of this nation. We remain committed to seeing tangible changes in the lives of each and every citizen as a result of the policies that this government would have set in place. We remain committed to seeing a strong, resilient Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, this is what an imaginative, inspirational, and aspirational government does. And that is what inspirational, imaginative, and aspirational governments do, and leaders do. Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I look forward to a productive and informative debate on this 2019-2020 budget. And as I do so, Mr. Speaker, I want to wish all of the workers in this country a happy Labor Day. I want to encourage them to remain steadfast in the honest intent to work for the good of all workers in this country. I want to assure them that they have the support of this government, not only in words but in deed. I want them to celebrate their day, free of the political interference. They must resist. I encourage them to resist the blatant overtures by the side opposite to make this a political demonstration. Mr. Speaker, this is about the workers. This is not a time for politics. Mr. Speaker, several years ago, the unions made an appeal to politicians and to the political parties to not come onto their march in partisan colors. But I see, Mr. Speaker, advertisements going around encouraging a particular party to come out in their colors. And at the same time, suggesting to the workers that they support them. Mr. Speaker, I put it to them and I put it to you that there's a contradiction there. Because if it's about the workers, so if it's about the workers, Mr. Speaker, it cannot be about wearing a color shirt to come out and show political support. Mr. Speaker, this has got to be about the workers. This is their day. Please, I encourage all of us, let the workers be in peace. This is about unity. This is about bringing together all of us from whatever political stripe, about celebrating the efforts of the unions in the building of this country and the contributions that they continue to make. Not about political strength. This is not about demonstrating that I'm better than you. This is about unity. This is about all of us. And so I cry shame on those who try to divide us along political lines on this very special day. I want to also acknowledge and pay respect to the memory of those who would have lost their lives in last year's parade. Truly tragic circumstance. We also pray for the young man that's involved in that because we know that there was no ill intent yet. A situation has happened. And we certainly want to pray for the families and for all of the unions that were involved. Finally, Mr. Speaker, today is World Environment Day, and so we certainly want to salute those who continue to fight for the protection of our environment. That is a thankless job, again, to a lot of us, because a lot of us see environmentalists as obstructionists to development. But there is a way that we can all work together to ensure that we have sustainable development that is good for the country and good for development and sustaining our economy. And so again, I want to thank the members for paying attention to this contribution. I want to thank the members for the people from East Grand Bahama for giving me this opportunity to be on this platform and to represent them, let them know that I appreciate them, and thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you, honourable member. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Exomas and Ragged Island on a point of order.
I didn't wish to interrupt the member for East Grand Bahama on this issue again, but I thought I should help him out so that we are completely clear as to what transpired in relation to my comments that he noted. Mr. Speaker, the member indicated that there was a press conference in relation to this budget where Davis and Cooper made some comments to the effect that the government was increasing VAT. And then one of his assistants provided him with a news story from the Bahama Journal in relation to one of his colleagues.
So what? You trying to bully this member?
East Grand.
No, don't go there. You don't go there.
East Grand Bahama is a senior man, you know. He's a senior man. So they provided him.
You're bullying this member.
They provided him an article from the Bahama Journal. And to clarify, Mr. Speaker, the article was written 2 years ago, June 12, 2017. Cooper was speaking on the budget communication, and I am picking snippets just to kind of help out the member, Mr. Speaker. And he said, who analyzed these campaign promises? And then he went on later, and he said, which I believe was that I said there was some comment about making no exemptions, and then I said, which I believe was the U.S. consultants directly engaged by the government and others who directly rely on empirical analysis, should the government start tinkering with VAT where it needs not, I foreshadow that it would likely result in the increase of VAT to as high as 15%. Mr. Speaker, I stand by that. There's no reason for me to question that. I stand by it, and I believe the context is very, very clear, and I believe the member was mistaken when he used that as his reference. But I'd like to help him further, Mr. Speaker. On May 19th, Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition held a press conference, and this is what he might be referring to, Mr. Speaker. See, I'm here to help, Mr. Speaker. And the leader said, will there be an increase in taxes to offset this revenue loss as a result of the promises listed above? Question mark. Will VAT be increased to 15% as a result? Question mark. So I don't know exactly what he was speaking of, but I suspect that this may have been carried, and this may be the reference that he is referring to. I don't believe that he intended to mislead this House, and therefore, you know, Mr. Speaker, I don't wish to belabor the point any further. I wouldn't want to have him spend more time trying to find articles in the newspaper, so I bring in some help to him. I'm fully aware that he has a lot of revenues to collect, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the member lays condemned by his own words. But be that as it may, I will bring the article to which I referred and lay it in the House, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Barnabas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a beautiful day here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I rise on behalf of the extended family of the good people of St. Barnabas, Mr. Speaker, grateful that they have accepted me as their own, and I will be forever humbled that they have chosen me to serve them. In St. Barnabas, Mr. Speaker, we've become a family, and we've all embraced the mantra that real people do real things. The people of St. Barnabas have reaffirmed my belief that there are values that transcend party politics. That is commitment for people, a deep concern for their welfare, hard work, community, respect for human dignity, and love of country. I give thanks to Almighty God who has allowed my life to be a testimony of failures, victories, struggles, and triumphs to the glory of His name, and hope that it serves as an example that His redeeming love is quantified in the loving and limitless mercy He provides. Mr. Speaker, as I prepare to contribute to this budget debate and consider our country's economic future, I analyzed the data, the options, where we were some 2 years ago, and the progress made, and the hard choices, Mr. Speaker, that we face as a people in this moment, and was overcome by a resolve that I bring to this honorable House and this budget debate this afternoon, that I will not retreat from, and that my conscience and my conviction, Mr. Speaker, has cemented in my heart and in my mind. That resolve has led to one determination, Mr. Speaker. This government is making major progress and must stay the course for the future of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, as I stand here today as a member of this honorable House, it never escapes my consciousness that for good or for bad, my words will have resonance across our Bahama land. So I work feverishly in my own imperfections to ensure that my words always reflect the thoughtfulness, honesty, humility, and love of my people and my country that I truly hope is seen in both my personal and political life. Mr. Speaker, in many ways, politics, or I should say petty politics, has been the greatest obstacle, in my view, to real reform of our economy. Mr. Speaker, we must change our approach to our budgetary and fiscal concerns, how we conduct the people's business, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I submit this thought for us to consider as we debate this very important budget, keeping in mind that these debates in recent times have been littered with political ploys dressed up as principled positions. Mr. Speaker, the battle between political interests and the interests of the Bahamian people are unfortunately at odds at times, Mr. Speaker. What has been fiscally prudent, good, and proper for the long-term sustainability of the economy and our people have taken a bow and back seat to a political strategy of win now and fix the fundamentals of the economy later. The results, Mr. Speaker, political parties win and ultimately the Bahamian people lose. We must elevate this debate on the economic prospects for our country, because if we continue to focus, Mr. Speaker, on the thought of losing a political fight, we will put ourselves, our people, in jeopardy of losing our country to an uncertain future. Mr. Speaker, I've worked all my life in service to my people and our nation, and there is no cost I would not bear to ensure her long-term prosperity and further upliftment and advancement of the Bahamian people whom I love. Mr. Speaker, as I stand here today, unapologetic in my belief that this country, our country, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, is the greatest nation on earth. Mr. Speaker, I've never been more optimistic about our capacity to bring real change and transformation to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. But we must, Mr. Speaker, we must all make sacrifices. We must endure and endorse a courageous path and rise to the occasion. Mr. Speaker, this is our moment yet again. Let us pause right here, right now, every member of Parliament, every Bahamian tuned into this budget debate, wherever you may be, on whichever family island, and those here in the public gallery. Though it may be difficult for some, I ask you for the love of your country, for the love of our country. Forget your politics and personal agenda just for this time, and let us, Mr. Speaker, be conscious of our conscience. For in facing our conscience, Mr. Speaker, we will find, I truly believe, that the constant obstacles and challenges that plague our development and march towards sustained prosperity as a people have been directly tied in part to a reluctance and outright refusal by some to accept responsibility for crafting our country's economic future in a selfless way. Mr. Speaker, I know there are some that will say I'm being unrealistic in my expectations, but I will continue to share, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not naive about the political realities we face, but I do believe that these realities have been created by us, just as the solutions to our most pressing problems and economic stability reside within all of us. In a real ironic way, Mr. Speaker, and in some respects, we have become both the problem and the solution. Mr. Speaker, a couple of months ago, I had the opportunity to visit the campus of Syracuse University. And I was on an hour's tour on that campus. And the tour ended in a building that was called the Maxwell School of Citizenship. And I got into a foyer with my two daughters, and I saw these words on the wall in the foyer, which I wish to share with this Parliament this evening. And it's from the oath of an Athenian city-state. And I quote, "We will ever strive for the ideals and sacred things of the city, both alone and with many. We will unceasingly seek to quicken the sense of public duty. We will revere and obey the city laws. We will transmit this city not only not less, Mr. Speaker, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us." Now, Mr. Speaker, I was instantly transfixed on those words and became overwhelmed because I instantly thought about the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and read it again like I'm about to read now and insert Commonwealth of the Bahamas where the word city is. we will ever strive for the ideals and sacred things of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, both alone and with many. We will unceasingly seek to quicken the sense of public duty. We will revere and obey the laws of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. We will transmit this Commonwealth not only less, Mr. Speaker, but greater, better, and more beautiful than it was transmitted to us. Mr. Speaker, this is the most basic question we ought to ask ourselves as we debate this budget. To what end do we advance our positions? Mr. Speaker, yes, this is a budget debate, but Mr. Speaker, it is so much more than that. It is about the future prosperity for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. It is about the dreams, the aspirations of the Bahamian people. It's about what we can become, what kind of country we want for the next generation. It's about creating an environment for the Bahamian entrepreneurial spirit to flourish, Mr. Speaker. It's about creating new industries as we work to diversify and strengthen the Bahamian economy for all. It's about the Bahamian woman, the food vendor, who's working tirelessly to make ends meet. Food preparation late at night, and she's up at the crack of dawn to meet her patrons. It's about that taxi driver who waits on long lines and endures the call-up system daily, waiting on our visitors. And while the taxi business has been good to their family, they want their children to reach for something different of their own desire, Mr. Speaker. It's about the 10 to 15, 20-year weekly government worker who can't be made permanent because the system just can't absorb them just yet. It is about the Bahamian student in his or her sophomore year in university who is eager to return home after graduation, but they aren't quite sure that the Bahamian economy will adequately accommodate and reward them for all their hard work that they've put in and qualifications they have earned. They are fending off that inclination to become reluctant participants in the ongoing brain drain, Mr. Speaker. This budget is about the thousands of Bahamian men and women who suffer from cancer, diabetes, and other non-communicable diseases and deserve an efficient state-of-the-art healthcare system. It's about that young man or young woman who has an idea and just needs an opportunity to access mentorship and capital, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this budget is about securing the future for generations of Bahamians. The Bahamian dream has not been fully experienced by enough of our people, Mr. Speaker. The dream has been deferred for far too long. This is our opportunity to put a down payment on the Bahamas' future and for our people. It is about our children and our children's children. Mr. Speaker, in the words of the oath I just shared, it is about how we will transmit this country, not only not less, but greater, better, and more beautiful than our forefathers would have transmitted it to us. Mr. Speaker, the book of Proverbs says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. Mr. Speaker, why do we insist on strapping a mountain of debt on the backs of our children and placing fiscal shackles on their feet? Why should they inherit the results of our selfishness, our lack of planning, short-sightedness, and I dare say, Mr. Speaker, courage? Mr. Speaker, the only debt our children should be faced with when they start their lives is their debt to society, the responsibility to give back. Mr. Speaker, it's fascinating to me that there are those that are saying right in this moment, Mr. Speaker, right now as we debate this bill, I understand the foundation and fundamentals of the economy needs to be firmed up. I understand we have to control our spending. I understand we need to put our fiscal house in order as the economy takes off. I understand that future generations must be protected. But they say, Mr. Speaker, and forgive me in this honorable place, they say to hell with the next generation. They say to hell with their future and future of our country. I need mines now. They have to get theirs. But this is the problem, Mr. Speaker. The next generation can't get theirs, Mr. Speaker. That's precisely the point. The next generation is getting theirs in the United States. They're getting theirs in Canada. They're getting theirs in Europe and China. And I'm all for new experiences. But they're helping to build other countries because they feel there's no reason for them to come back home. Mr. Speaker, because we have not gained the courage, patriotism, and selflessness, to do what's right on the Bahamian economy, when will we stand up? When will we invest for the long term? Build an economy for all? Or what will we do right now? Suck the life out of the Bahamian economy? For our own selfish intentions, Mr. Speaker, the soil was tilled for us. We must now do the same for others. Mr. Speaker, if we do not get a handle on our fiscal and economic priorities and approach this debate with a sense of urgency and vision about our fiscal future and long-term prosperity as a nation, we will be doomed, and history will not be kind to any of us. We will resign ourselves to the heap of cowards and ingrates that did not stand up when our country needed us most. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget of progress, putting us on the path towards sustained prosperity and progress for the Bahamian people. It is our solemn obligation. It is our solemn obligation to uplift every Bahamian and to help make their lives better, Mr. Speaker. And it starts with the Bahamian economy. Mr. Speaker, no singular task is greater than a government's commitment to strengthen and fortify its nation's economy. Our economy is our nation's lifeblood on which the fulfillment of every Bahamian dream hinges. This budget debate, Mr. Speaker, as fundamental as it is to our long-term prosperity and survival, has consistently and sadly always been diminished and hijacked by our politics. Mr. Speaker, in order for this budget debate to be effective, significant, and consequential, as it should be, we must in this moment, both legislators and the electorate, the Bahamian people, government and opposition, pause for just a brief moment if we could. Tuck away our political biases and resist the urge to allow often self-induced partisanship, propaganda, and politics to suppress our fundamental duty to country first. Mr. Speaker, the preservation of our Commonwealth demands that we not shrink away from ensuring the vitality of our economic future, in which our national budget plays a starring role. Mr. Speaker, let's be honest with ourselves and not be delusional. The inescapable, unavoidable truth, Mr. Speaker, is that our challenges within our economy are decades old. There have been no surprises here, Mr. Speaker. Government after government, Mr. Speaker, have been wrestling with these fiscal issues from one election cycle to the next. They have been fermenting for decades, Mr. Speaker, submerged in political expediency, given a pass by all of us, every single one of us, Mr. Speaker. Given a pass because we don't have the answers? No. Mr. Speaker, given a pass by our parliamentary predecessors because we allowed the politics to become greater than the patriotism. Yes. Mr. Speaker, and while successive governments, F&M and PLP, have contributed to what we have today, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister and this government and this Minister of Finance has been tasked to start, Mr. Speaker. Start to fix it, and fix it in a real way once and for all, Mr. Speaker. No more kicking the can down the road, Mr. Speaker. No more pandering to our insatiable need as politicians to be re-elected. Not just attempting to score political points. Mr. Speaker, if there's one thing I wholeheartedly believe, Mr. Speaker, that is that the Free National Movement and the Progressive Liberal Party is unified in the belief that we cannot tax ourselves into prosperity. So the implementation of that by the Progressive Liberal Party in 2015 and reluctant subsequent adoption of 12% by this administration was unfortunately and regrettably necessary for our fiscal and economic survival. Mr. Speaker, why else would both parties take such an action when neither were popular? And why wouldn't the opposition state from now that they will reduce it back to 7.5%? Clearly, it wasn't a political easy thing to do, Mr. Speaker, but sadly necessary. I'm simply stating, Mr. Speaker, that the Bahamian people have waited too long for us to begin to create, diversify, and expand an economy that inspires our people and secures their dreams. This government, under the leadership of the Most Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, has taken up the mantle and heeded the call for action. The Bahamian people deserve better, and this government is doing what needs to be done to make things better, and things are getting better, but we all know there's still much more work, Mr. Speaker, to be done. Mr. Speaker, today as we begin this debate in earnest, there's an opportunity, a real opening to provide to those who've elected us, the Bahamian people, an update on the progress made and projections for our fiscal and economic well-being. The question, though, Mr. Speaker, is will we use this debate to craft a more certain future and nourish the possibilities of what we can become as a country and the people? Will we reject the most maddening, Mr. Speaker, idea that there are different versions of the truth on the economy and accept that truth is truth and it shall set us free? Amen. In this budget debate, can we just this once not spew political rhetoric and instead evolve in this moment, Mr. Speaker, mature in this moment? The Bahamian people deserve that. As political leaders, we have a role to play, and so does the electorate. But we are instantly guilty, Mr. Speaker, of continuing a grave disservice to our people if we are not upfront and transparent with the information we give. Case in point, Mr. Speaker, this larger discussion about this budget and our economy naturally gets to a political discussion, but some gloss over the impact of this government's need to address the $700 million plus owed to vendors. Mr. Speaker, not 7, not $70 million, $700 million. Nearly $750 million in unpaid bills, Mr. Speaker. That just doesn't go away. It doesn't magically disappear in the air. But the truth is it has impacted, and it did impact our fiscal standing and influence decisions made. But Mr. Speaker, even more basic than that, this money reflects monies that were owed to many small businesses, many Bahamians, real people that had real bills, trying to survive. They were disadvantaged, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, Speaker, 1,046. That's the total number of vendors that have to be paid. Out of 1,046, roughly 1,016 are our people, Bahamians, that couldn't pay their bills, light bills, mortgages, school fees, doctor visits, medical prescriptions. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, could not even bury a loved one because life didn't stop for them. Year to date, Mr. Speaker, 859 of those Bahamians, the small businesses, have been paid in part or full, and 188 received no payment or are awaiting remaining payment against the balance owed. Mr. Speaker, who got up and cried for these Bahamians and sympathized with them? The opposition didn't. They were put to work with no plan of how to pay them. Basic in life, Mr. Speaker, you work, you get paid. This government gave them their relief that they earned, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this other discussion about needing to put money in the people's pockets is one we can have and should have. But this government has made sure that 859 of those Bahamian vendors, those families, have received their monies in their pockets, Mr. Speaker, so that they can pay their bills. This government knows, Mr. Speaker, I know, the struggles of the Bahamian people. They are my friends, they are your friends, my family, your family, my constituents, your constituents. Mr. Speaker, we live here too. I live here too. I go to the same grocery stores, gas station, I stand on BPL and water sewage line and pay my bill like everyone else. While I humbly admit, Mr. Speaker, that my circumstances may be better than many, I watch my budget because if I don't, my children's future will be in jeopardy. And that's what we are talking about, the future of the next generation of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, we're not living for ourselves, or we should not be living for ourselves. We should be living for our children. We keep gambling away our children's future and operating our nation's fiscal affairs like a petty shop. Okay. Where is our conscience, Mr. Speaker? It must stop, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this has not been a choice between fixing our economy and trying to be there for the Bahamian people. We have done both. But I would make the argument that fixing the economy is working for the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. Why do we play fast and loose with these words? This is what I'm talking about. We're doing this for the future of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the 1 o'clock hour, and so at this point in time, Mr. Speaker, we will take our luncheon break. I see the time says 6 minutes, but really the member has another 30 minutes after that, and so we will break and come back at 3.
Thank you. So, the motion. Honorable member for Bamboo Town. Honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Oh, I didn't put the motion, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House suspends until 3 p.m.
Second.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.